So this is Note Taking Guide 7.1, and we're talking about angle relationships. Does anybody know what vertical angles are? So it says two, oh, go ahead.
Isn't that like vertical, like on the y-axis, or the x-axis?
Oh, so you're thinking about either up or down or left or right, right? And that's a good way to think. Vertical is up and down. You're right about that. When we're talking about angles, though, we're talking about angles that are across from each other when we have two intersecting lines. So if you just draw any two lines, vertical angles are the ones that are straight across from each other. So you have this angle here, and you have this angle here. Do you see how they're straight across from each other? Those are vertical angles. And it says vertical angles are always congruent. Do you know what congruent means? Congruent means equal. So if they're equal to each other, if this one was 70 degrees, guess what this one's going to be? 70 degrees. Okay? So any two angles that are directly across from each other in the intersection of two lines are called vertical angles. You guys following me on that? All right, does anybody know what a linear pair is? What does linear mean? It means on a line, right? Or linear is a line. So two angles that are adjacent, meaning they touch each other, they share a side, and are supplementary. Supplementary meaning that they add to 180 degrees. They would be linear because they form a straight line together. So this angle and this angle right here are called a linear pair because they're on the same line together, which means they automatically add up to 180 degrees. So if this side of the angle was 60 degrees, what does this side of the angle have to be? Yeah, 120, thank you. Okay. Linear pair, make a straight line together. All right, what did we say supplementary was on the bell work? It is any two angles whose sum is 180 degrees. So for an example of that, maybe you have an angle here like this, and then you have an angle over here like this. If you were to slide them together, you would get a linear pair, but because they're not slid together and have that adjoining side right there, they're just supplementary. They would add up to 180. So if this side over here was 100 degrees, then this side over here would have to be 80, because supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. Is this seeming like a review? You've heard this stuff before? Maybe? Kind of? All right, so complementary then are any two angles whose sum to 90 degrees. 90-degree angles usually form that right angle together, right? Like 90 degrees, just like that. This. So you could have like it split in the middle like this and have this one be 45 degrees and this one be 45 degrees. But they don't have to touch each other. You could have two angles that don't touch each other that would add up to 90 degrees. So they don't have to necessarily be smacked up next to each other. They just have to add up to 90 degrees. And then the last kind of angle that we're talking about today are called adjacent angles. Adjacent angles are angles that share a common side. So we drew a whole bunch of adjacent angles just now. Like even when I draw two lines, I have sets of adjacent angles because this angle right here would be adjacent to that angle. Or you could go and just even do a different color and say this angle is adjacent to that angle. Angles that are adjacent have a common side together. They don't really necessarily have any other rules besides they share that common side. Okay. So on number one example here, it says, and let's just read it the way that it says, given the measure of angle 1 equals 45. That's the way that that's written. The measure of angle 1 equals 45. Find the measure of its complement and the measure of its supplement. So what does this complement and it have to add up to be? Anybody remember what complementary means? Yeah, they add up to 90. So if one of them's already 45, to find the other one, wouldn't you just do 90 minus 45 to find the complement? And how much is 90 minus 45?
45.
Yep, you're right. Then in the same problem here, it asked me to find its supplement. The supplements add up to 180. So I would do 180 minus the original, which is 45. And when you do that, you find its supplementary angle. And what do you get when you do that?
135.
Nice, thank you. Nice job today. Okay. So we're using the information that we know from our rules up above to solve for the missing angle. Sometimes that's going to involve a variable like this next one does. So let's read it and see what it says. The measure of angle A equals 15x plus 4. The measure of angle B equals x plus 32. Angle A and angle B are vertical angles. Find the measure of angle A and the measure of angle B. So what do we know about vertical angles? You remember the rule we said up there above about vertical angles?
I didn't even get vertical angles.
Okay, vertical angles are right up at the top. They're across from each other when you draw two lines. And it said here that they were congruent, and I told you that congruent means equal. So vertical angles are equal. So if these two angles are equal to each other, what can I do with this stuff right here? I can set them equal to each other. So I'm going to go 15x plus 4 equals x plus 32. And I'm going to solve that equation. In order to solve that equation, I need to get all of my x's on one side together. So do you want to move the x this direction or the 15x the other direction? I like to move the x to stay positive, so I'm going to move this by subtracting x to the other side. It cancels over here. And on the other side, I get 14x plus 4. How do I solve for the x now? What do I do with the 4? I subtract it. You get 14x equals 28. Divide both sides by 14. And what do you get your x value to be? Thank you, it is 2. Now, did I answer the question? I got x equals 2. They didn't ask me for what x was. They asked me what angle A and B was. So what am I going to do with this 2 really fast? I'm going to go plug it back in. So I'm going to go 15 times 2 plus 4. Do you know what that measures? $34. And then 2 plus 32? 34. You know what, I am out, but you're welcome. 2 plus 32 is 34. Now here's the big idea behind this. I know I did that right because those were vertical angles, and what had to happen? They had to be equal to each other. Okay, so 34 and 34 for my 2 angles. All right, let's try another one. This one says the measure of angle A equals 16x minus 13. The measure of angle B equals 2x minus 5. Angle A and angle B are complementary angles. Find the measure of angle A and angle B. What do we know about complementary angles? What does the rule say? The rule says they add up to be how much?
180.
That's supplementary. This time it's complementary, so it would be 90, right? They add up to be 90. So I'm going to add these two angles together and equal it to 90 because they're complementary. So we're going to combine like terms and then just solve the equation. I have 16x here and 2x here, which adds together to be 18x. I have a negative 13 here and a negative 5 here to be a minus 18. And it's still set equal to 90. Now it's just a simple two-step equation where I just move stuff. So the first thing I have to move is the minus 18. How do I move it to the other side? I add it. So I get 18x equals 108. And then divide both sides by 18 to solve for the x. 108 divided by 18 is x equals, I think it's 6. Anybody else got it? 18, 6. Okay. That's not what they asked me though. They didn't ask me for what x was. They asked me for what angle A and angle B was. So I have to go substitute it back in. So I would have 16 times 6 minus 13 for the first angle. Which gives me 83. Now I know these two angles add up to be 90, so what should the other one be? It should be 7. So let's check our work and see. I have 2 times 6 minus 5. That would be 12 minus 5, which is 7. Did my angles add up to be right? They did. They added up to be 90 degrees, so I know I did it correctly. Okay. All right, the next problem says that the two angles are supplementary. Supplementary means they add up to 180 degrees. So what am I going to do with these two equations? I'm going to add them together and equal them to 180. Do you guys remember how sometimes I tell you when they're stacked together like that, let's just add them straight down so we're not so confused with what we're doing? Let's add those straight down and then equal them to 180 so it's not as messy. What's the 4x plus the 11x? That's 15x. And what's the negative 2 plus 17? That's a positive 15. I know when I add them together, I equal to 180. So now I just have this two-step equation to solve. So I'm going to get rid of that positive 15 right there by subtracting it to the other side. I get 15x equals 165. Divide by 15 and I get x equals 11. Now again, they didn't ask me what x was, so I have to go substitute it back in.